All right, we have our first of two big releases for 2020. I almost said 2021. It's like when you're like writing the date out at school and you continuously for like the first month just keep messing up that last number, so you just have to like scribble it in. That's kind of where I'm at right now in that case. Anyway, yeah, let's talk about one of two big releases for 2022. Is it going to be amazing or is it going to be a little bit of a lackluster? Well, let's find out. Welcome to the Planet by Big Big Train. So, Big Big Train, big band from the UK. And over the years have gotten a plethora of individuals coming in and out of the band like any good progressive rock band should. This one does come at a little bit of a bittersweet as it is the last album featuring David Lungden on lead vocals and flute. He was a driving force for the band since the mid-2000s when he came on board and essentially became the front runner. He became the front man for the longest time. His personality just elevated and pushed the band in a very unique and very fun way. Even with that, we still have a lot of changeovers. You know, Common Ground, released just last year, had the band stripped down to just the four members of David himself, Nick DeVargelo on drums, Rickard Solblum on keyboards, guitars, and vocals, and Greg Sponson on bass. It was a very unique iteration of the band, and I found I returned to Common Ground quite regularly. I thought it was one of the better albums that the group has put out. And so, yeah, we come to Welcome to the Planet, which is following very closely off of the heels of Common Ground, and I was a little hesitant about this album because they had already done something very similar to this with Folklore, Grimm's Pound, and Second Brightest Star, and I felt like each subsequent album was getting of a lesser quality, shall we say. I wasn't a big fan of Grimm's Pound, and I wasn't a fan of Second Brightest Star, and I was hoping that we weren't going to get a repeat of that. The comparisons for Common Ground can definitely be made. The album cover is very similar, and most of the individuals are returning, and those who were kind of helping out in the features of Common Ground are actually in the folds now with the rest of the group, such as Carly Benton, Dave Foster, and Claire Lindsay. And they really do help round out the album. So yeah, with all that lead up, what does this album actually sound like? What's the flavors that we're getting here? And it's really interesting because when you compare, like, this is definitely not a sister album to Common Ground. This is very much its own thing. It does have the same kind of flavors in it, where I found like Common Ground was a kind of a typical Big Train, big sound. This one is a little bit more stripped down, which I thought was very interesting, seeing as we have a lot more individuals kind of tucked into the fold in that sense. There's a few things that this album, and I don't want to say lacks, but doesn't continue with the Big Train mythos. The big thing is that there's kind of no epics on this album. You know, Big Train is usually very big on their epics, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, with very big soaring narrative songs. You're either looking to the past with these grand adventures, or you're commenting on very British things. And both of those essences that I come to Big Train for are not here. There's no big soaring soundscapes. I think the longest track on here is 7 minutes with Oak and Stone. The big kind of commentary on either British lifestyles or the British countryside or any kind of like historical epic or historical story, those are all gone for more of a intimate, more reflective tracks. The closest that we might get is proper Jack Frost kind of talking about the winter and some of the things that we really like tobogganing down a hill on a sled or something along those lines. But even with this, I want to talk about what's actually found on this album, what's actually being discovered here. I do like how present Nick DeVargelo is on this album, both in the singing styles and on the drumming. The only thing, though, is that it kind of hugs a little too close to his previous band of Spock's Beard in that he does bring that soundscapes. And a big example of this is the second track of the Connection Plan. This track could fit easily off of any of the Spock's Beards album post Neil Morse. And another one is Bats in the Belfry, one of 2 instrumental tracks off of here. And this really goes to show Nick's drumming styles. Like, his drumming works on this are really, really something to be admired, both on the Connection Plan as well as Bats in the Belfry. I think he has such a command on that, and he brings this powerhouse to some of these more simple tracks. And talking about instrumentals, I also love the first instrumental, the second one I'm going to be talking about, A Room with No Ceiling. This one feels like it's definitely a Rickard Solblum's track, and it feels very much, especially with some of the soundscapes that we have on there, for Beardfish. Like, that's probably one of my favorite moments on this. I was listening to it, I'm like, hey, Beardfish, oh man, I love these guys. And it really kind of does show the new mythos that we have with Big Big Train, in that I don't want to say it's a melting pot, but they're definitely like taking bits and flavors of a lot of contemporary progressive rock bands, such as Spock's Beards, such as Beardfish, and kind of like bringing them into their own fold to see what they can do with it. I do wonder if it is kind of losing that Big Big Train identity because of that, though, because I'm not feeling quite as much of the Big Big Train identity on this particular album like I did with Common Ground or the Grand Tour. And even with that, there are a few tracks that do have some very satisfying builds on there. I'm looking at Laterna, the third track, as well as Oak and Stone, the longest track. I like how both of these tracks start off pretty somber and very mellow. It does its job really building the atmosphere, and both showcase David's just haunting singing styles on there. And they both build to a very satisfying crescendo and a very satisfying climb in that sense. I don't feel as though, I'm ever bored in more of the somber and slower parts, the beginning part, because I always know that they're going to be very well rounded by the endpoints of both of these tracks. Probably one of my favorite aspects of this album are the more somber and heartfelt tracks. The first track of Made for Sunshine and the title track, the last track of Welcome to the Planet, are both very, very somber, very quiet tracks, at least in the beginning. Specifically Made for Sunshine. This album starts off and opens up like a kind of a blooming spring flower in that sense. And I love how they kind of take the idea of, Stardust We Are, that say like the Flower Kings would lie down, and twist it a little bit and change it a little bit to Made from Sunshine. It's basically the whole essence that all of the molecules that we see around us were constructed and made within the heart of a star. And that's just who we are. We're made of the warmth from the sun. You can make this more metaphysical, and that warmth from the sun is God's love, if you want to look at it that way. Or if you want to look at it a scientific way, the thing that's providing us with all the nutrients, we're also a part of that. So, and I like that. I like that kind of more somber, a little bit more intimate storytelling in that sense. Talking about Welcome to the Planet, I also love how this kind of has a little bit more of like a new agey feel, especially within the synths that are lying down. Like, I'm getting a very strong flavor of Vangelis from like Chariots of Fire or his other soundtracks in that sense. And I love the gradual build that this track has. This does lead me, though, to probably my biggest gripe about this album, which is the build-up that we have with Welcome to the Planet. I love that build-up. The best metaphor for this is being on one of those like moving sidewalks that you have at airports. So you're walking, you step on it, and you start to just feel the movement, and you feel the acceleration within it as the time signature changes and gets faster. You have more instruments going on, so there's a lot more momentum behind you until you get to the big crescendo, which slows right back down to where we were at the beginning of the track. And so it feels like this moving sidewalk, you're having a great time on this treadmill, but then it stops abruptly and you trip over yourself because A, the buildup does not match the payoff, and B, all of that momentum that came with you basically shoves you off of the conveyor belt and you come tumbling down. So I always find that I like smack myself in the face when I hear that big welcome to the planet when it's so slowed down. I really wish that they continued the rhythm, they continued that momentum and really like exploded and kept that tempo. and then slowed down. It basically took what should have been one of my all-time favorite Big Big Train tracks and put a massive thorn into it that I'm just like, ugh. All right, well, let's put this one on the shelf with all those other big tracks that I love that I can't really listen to because I get so angry at it, you know? Like, anyway. So all that being said and done, I actually had a really good time with this one. And I can see a lot of people not necessarily jumping onto this that came to Big Big Train for those bigger sounds, for those epic stories, for those longer epic tracks. But I do feel like this is a much more accessible album for anybody. Like, this is one that somebody off of the street could basically put on and have a pretty good time. I feel like this one is one that's probably going to garner them a lot more of a fan base because of how accessible it is, how easy it is to digest. It kind of reminds me of some of the more poppy prog that we had from the 70s, like something like Alan Parsons would put out. But for me, this is probably one that I'll be playing quite often, but it's not one of my favorites of theirs. It's far and away from their worst, absolutely, but it doesn't really hold a lot of like really gripping tracks. But I will say I'll probably put this one on quite often if I'm in the mood for just some really relaxing, not too challenging music in that sense. So it's for that reason that I would say that Welcome to the Planet by Big Big Train is one that I would most likely download. It has enough to come back to it, but there's not quite enough of those big hooks that really make me excited for it. So yeah, that's what I've got. What do you guys think about Welcome to the Planet from Big Big Train? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever your thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's about it. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.